Welcome back to Jackson Square. And today we're going to be looking at dividing decimals or decimal division. So let's refresh our memory on the parts of a division problem. First, we know that the number inside of the division bracket is called the dividend. The number being divided is called the dividend. The number that tells you how to break up the dividend or how to group it is called the divisor. The answer that you get in the end is the quotient, and anything we have left over is called the remainder. Here's another representation of this division problem or a division problem with the obolus. The number in front is the dividend. That's the number being broken up or divided. The second number is our divisor. It tells us how we're going to break up this number, dividend, and the answer is the quotient. Division. When we are dividing decimals, the divisor cannot have a decimal. There cannot be a decimal in the divisor. So that number that tells us how to group it or break it up cannot be a decimal number. It has to be a whole number. You move the divisor decimal so it is a whole number. Move the same amount of places in the dividend that you moved in the divisor. You want to keep it balanced, okay? Place a decimal straight up where you write your answer, rewrite the problem, and then you divide as normal. So let's look at the example. In the example, we had 1 and 41 hundredths divided by 3 tenths. We couldn't have a decimal in the divisor, so we moved the decimal point one place to the right, and then the directions tell us anything we do to the outside or the divisor, we have to do to the dividend. So then we had to move the decimal point, one place to the right in the dividend. So then they rewrote the problem and it became 14 and 1/10 divided by 3. Remember, when we're reading in a division bracket, we read from right to left, from inside of the house to outside. So it became 14 and 1/10 divided by 3. So they divided as normal and got a quotient of 4 and 7/10. So let's jump into some practice problems. So here we have a Google slide, and you will have one. Sorry, you will not have one. Here we have a Google slide that I'm going to use to help us demonstrate how to move our decimal places, how to rewrite the problem, and get our quotient. So we're going to do a lot in this process of long division with decimals. We're going to move the decimal place out of the divisor, we're going to rewrite our problems, and we're going to get our quotient. You're going to get to practice this process inside of Schoology. So it won't look quite the same, but it's the same process. So please make sure that you follow along and take great notes. So what I did was I took the opportunity to rewrite the problems from the Google slide on a piece of paper because I just need to be able to write it down and see it. So our first problem is 5 and 6/10 divided by 16 hundredths. Remember the parts. The first numbers are always our dividend, and our second number is our divisor. The dividend is the number that goes inside of the house, and our divisor is the number that is on the outside. So when I rewrite my problem, I'm going to make sure that 5 and 6/10 is on the inside and 16 hundredths is on the outside. If you remember from our directions, it told us clearly that we cannot have a decimal point in our divisor. So I would have to move it 2 places, 1, 2, to the right to get that decimal place behind the 16. Remember, we talked about decimal place value, and I told you that the decimal point is behind the ones place. So we want to move this decimal 2 places to the right to make it behind the ones place. But anything I do to the divisor, I also have to do to the dividend. So I need to move this 2 places. 1, 2. And remember, if there's nothing there, we can always add a placeholder of 0. So now we've moved our decimal. Now we have a decimal place here and a decimal point there. Let's rewrite our problem without the decimal point in the divisor. In the directions, it told us to bring our decimal point straight up. So now my decimal is at the end. I'm going to bring it straight up above the division bracket, and then I can get to dividing. So now our problem has become 560 divided by 16. I do not have a handy dandy piece of paper, so I'm just going to use a colored piece of paper to help me with my division process, and I'm going to note my steps on it. So remember, we use the mnemonic device. Does McDonald's sell cheeseburgers? So that's divide, multiply, subtract, check, bring down. And then after that, we always do our little like recycle symbol. That means that we start that process over. So this is going to be my handy dandy piece of paper that I use to help me while I'm dividing. I'm going to zoom in a bit. So first we're looking at one number at a time. Can I divide 16 into 5? Can 16 go into 5? No, there are no groups of 16 and 5, so I'm going to put a 0 here. Now I slide my paper over. I'm going to use my highlighter so that you can see how things are lining up. Now I'm dividing 16 into 56. I don't know my 16 times table, so I have to do a little bit of scratch work. I don't think I want to start with 16 and 5 because that would be too big, because I know that 6 times 5 is 30. So I might try doing 16 times 4. And that's still too big. So then I would do some side work and do 3. And seems like 3 is just right. So I'm going to say 3. So that was my divide step. Now I'm going to multiply. 3 times 16, I know is 48. Now here's my next step where I subtract. And I have to borrow from the 5. It becomes a 4, and this is going to become a 16. 16 minus 8 is 8. So now I'm on my check. Always check that the answer you got when you subtracted is smaller than your divisor. If this number is not smaller than your divisor, then the number in your quotient is wrong, okay? It has to be smaller, and you always check before you bring down. So 8 is smaller than 16. I can check off my 3, slide my paper over, bring down my 0. Then I start over with divide. What times 16 will get me closest to 80? So let's go back to our side work. Let's try 5. 5, it gives me exactly 80, so that's what I want. So I'm going to put 5 up here. Then I multiply 5 times 16, we know is 80. I subtract, I get 0. Just because I get 0 doesn't mean I don't check. So I still check. Is 0 less than 16? Yes. Check off my work, slide my paper over. I don't have anything left to bring down, so I'm done. And this point, it didn't go past the decimal, so our answer was just 35, which is a whole number. That was our quotient, okay? So this was our original problem. This is where we moved our decimal. This is where we rewrote our problem in our quotient. And this was just my little side work. So let's jump into another one. So our next problem says 560 divided by 1 6/10. So again, we're going to rewrite this problem. Dividend goes in the house. And we know we cannot have any decimal points in our divisor. No decimal point. So I'm going to have to move my decimal point one place to the right this time. So one place to the right. Anything I do to the divisor, I also have to do to the dividend. Well, where's my decimal? My decimal is behind the 0. So I'm going to have to take it and move it one place to the right. And again, there's nothing there, so I need to add a placeholder. So now that I have this, I'm going to rewrite my problem so that we can solve it. Again, I'm using graphing paper or grid paper so that I can keep my numbers aligned. And the decimal point was here. You would bring it straight up. Sometimes you'll use that decimal point, sometimes you don't, but I want you guys to get in practice of writing it and bringing it straight up so when we need it, we'll already have it there and you don't have to worry about where it goes. So now our problem has become 5,600 divided by 16. So again, I'm going to grab my handy dandy piece of paper and I'm going to use it to help me divide. So the first thing is, how many groups of 16 in 5? Just like the problem above, there's 0, right? Let me highlight my 5 so you can see my line up. There are 0. There are no groups. So I'm going to slide my paper over. And now I'm dividing into 56. How many groups of 16 and 56? Well, we know from our side work last time, the closest we can get is 3. So I'll put a 3 on top. We know that 3 times 16 is 48. Try to write it in here. We subtract. We get a lovely answer. Oh, after we borrow, let me borrow again so y'all see that. 16 minus 8 is 8. We remember to check, 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 check. So we're going to say that 8 is less than 16. Check off my 3. Slide my paper over. Bring down my 0. So now I'm going to highlight this so that you can see how my quotient numbers are lining up with the digits that I'm highlighting. Okay. So now how many times will 16 go into 80? Again, from our last time, we know that the answer is 5, right? So we're going to put our 5 here. 5 times 16 gives me 80. I subtract, I get 0. Remember to check. Is 0 less than 16? Sure it is. So I check off my 5. Slide my paper over. This time I have another digit to bring down. I have a 0 to bring down. Well, guess what? I know at this point some of you would stop because you're like, it's 0. But you still have to engage and keep working. This 0 matters, okay? This 0 does matter. So you have to go through the process until you're done and there's nothing left to bring down. Don't stop till there's nothing left. Don't stop till you get enough. So don't stop till there's nothing left to bring down. So we have a 0 to bring down. We got to still keep dividing. So we go back here and start over. How many groups of 16 and 0? 0. What's 0 times 16? 0. We subtract 0 minus 0 is 0. We check, is 0 less than 16? Yes, it is. We check it off, slide my paper over. There's nothing to bring down. Now I'm done. So don't stop until you are done. You know you're done when there's nothing left to bring down, or you don't have to add zeros to keep the process going. Okay? So at this point, we have a quotient of 350. And I'm going to take all of these answers that I have, and I'm going to show you how to do them in the Google slide, how you would move them around so that you know how to do your school's year assignment. Okay? So 2 down, 1 more left to go. See if I can get my paper situated. Okay, there we go. So our last problem here says 5,600 divided by 16. So this problem is different, right? We don't have a decimal in the divisor. This may look like it's going to be pretty easy. So let's rewrite our problem. And because we don't have anything to move, that part is easy, but remember to bring our decimal straight up. So bring your decimal point straight up. So it'll already be there in your quotient. So we're going to start just like we've started before. Get our handy dandy piece of paper. We're going to start with divide. How many groups of 16 are in 5? And all the people say 0. Okay, none. So because there are none, slide my paper over. Move on to 56. How many groups of 16 are in 56? I'm going to use a light highlighter. So what do we say? We know that it's going to be 3, right? We know that 3 times 16 is going to give us 48. We need to borrow or regroup. We need to subtract. I'm going to get 8. Is 8 less than 16? Yes, it is. Check that off. Then at this point, is there anything left to bring down? No, there's nothing. So what would I do? At this point, you can add a 0 so that you can keep engaging this 8 until you're done. So you can add a 0 and bring it down. Again, remember I said don't stop. Don't stop till you know that you're done. So I know that I'm not done because I've done this problem 3 different ways, right? So at this point, we're divided into 80. How many groups of 16 go into 80? And the crowd says 5. 5 times 16 gives me 80. I get 0. Is 0 less than 60? Yes. Check off my 5. Nothing left to bring down. Now, if I wanted to at this point, I could add another 0 and engage it. But most of the time when we have decimals, anything after a number that's a 0, we just kind of drop it off. So at this point, we are done. And our quotient for this problem would be 35 thousandths. Sorry, you guys can't see that. Our quotient would be 35 thousandths, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. 35 thousandths, which is a totally different answer. Every one of our problems had a different quotient, and it varied on where the decimal was in the divisor, how many times we had to move it in the divisor and the dividend. So we went from 2 places to 1 places to no places, and our answers were different. 35,000, 350, and 35 are totally different answers. Now let's go back to that Google slide, and I'll show you how this would look. So in our Google slide, after we would take the first problem and rewrite it, and I'm going to use my notes. So after I moved my decimal, my divisor became 560. Sorry, my dividend became 560, the number inside the house, and my divisor became 16. Our quotient was 35. So this is a rewrite step. In between, we had our step where we moved the decimal, but then when we rewrote it to work it, this is what they mean by rewritten, okay? So then the next one, when we moved our decimal one place, we ended up with 5,600 as our dividend, and 16 was our divisor. And our answer, our quotient, was 350. So take note of this because it should be similar in Schoology. Look different, but same process. And our last problem, we didn't have to move our decimal at all. So this stayed to be 56 hundredths. And this didn't have a decimal. It stayed 16. But our quotient was 35,000. So there we go. Here are our problems. They have been rewritten and the quotient has been placed there. So you will have some problems to practice yourself. Make sure you have a piece of paper and a pencil, and if you need to make your handy dandy piece of paper like I did, go ahead and do it and write down the steps. Remember, does McDonald's sell cheeseburgers? We know they do. But that's a great mnemonic device that helps us remember the steps of division. I hope this helps. Now you go practice.